Have you ever prayed for something and prayed for something and then you wait and you wait and you feel like maybe you're not getting the answer you wanted from God, if any answer at all? But you feel like, okay, but God is asking me to wait, right? He's asking me just to pray and wait. Does God ask us to pray and wait? That's what I want to talk about today, because my Bible reading this morning was from Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was this guy who was the cupbearer for the king. And when he heard the news that the walls in Jerusalem had been torn down, he went to God in prayer. And in Nehemiah 1:4, it says that he was so upset, he fell down, he fasted, he prayed, and he wept. And I was like, wow, that's really hard. That's tough. Like, the walls of Jerusalem were torn down. And because the walls of Jerusalem were torn down, that's where the temple was. So the temple was at risk for theft from bandits and wild animals. It was completely unprotected. The whole city of Jerusalem was unprotected. So this was a really big deal. Hence the reason Nehemiah went to God in prayer. But it doesn't stop there, because Nehemiah didn't just go to God in prayer. Here's what he did next. When Nehemiah went to God in prayer, he didn't pray and say, God, these walls really need to be rebuilt. Can you send somebody to do that? Or can you motivate the people who are still in Jerusalem to get up and do something about this? Or can you just miraculously repair it? No, instead, Nehemiah took action. He got up and he went to the king and he asked for the king's permission for him to oversee, personally, for Nehemiah to oversee the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. And the king granted his request. And then he asked the king, hey, can you also provide letters to the governors of all the provinces that I'll be traveling through on my way to Jerusalem for my protection? And the king did not only that, but the king also sent soldiers to accompany Nehemiah to make sure he made it to Jerusalem safely. Nehemiah didn't just sit back and say, God, please send someone, or please take care of this. Nehemiah took action. When Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, he goes out in the middle of the night and inspects the wall by himself in secret and starts mapping out his game plan. And then he goes to all of the priests and the rulers across the city, and he starts delegating and saying, you're in charge of this part, and you're in charge of this part, and let's all work together. And he starts motivating the people. Well, of course, Satan doesn't like what he's doing, and there start to be enemies who are rising up, and they're actually some of the leaders in the city who are mocking Nehemiah and making fun of the people and saying, this can't be done, and what are you doing? You're rebelling. And Nehemiah keeps pushing forward anyway, all the while praying to God still and giving God the glory for what is being accomplished. See, Nehemiah 4:6 says that God's people had a mind to work. They kept pressing forward. And when those same people who were jeering at them and ridiculing them started saying they were going to attack them and they were going to cause confusion in the city, Nehemiah prayed again, but he also took action again. And he had guards set up so they could watch over the city. And then he started calling to all the Jews in the surrounding areas, and they all came in and stood in the open spaces in the walls with their weapons. And when the enemy found out that God had overthrown their plan, they stopped, and the wall continued to be built. But all of the people wore their weapons on them as they built the wall every day. And Nehemiah set aside half of the workers just to stand guard and be ready to fight in case they were attacked. Nehemiah was still praying. He was still trusting in God, but he was taking action. And he told the people in Nehemiah 4:14, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. In verse 20, Nehemiah reminded the people again, our God will fight for us. He was still trusting in God, but he was doing what he could to make a difference. More conspiracies came against Nehemiah. That wasn't the end of it. People tried to sabotage him. There were all kinds of complications and problems, but God prevailed, and the wall around Jerusalem was rebuilt in just 52 days. And all of the enemies surrounding them, all of the nations, saw what God had done. And they were afraid because they knew that this could only be a work of the Lord. Sometimes we're on our faces, just like Nehemiah, and we're crying and we're praying to God and we're making our pleas because we are facing confusion or hurt or tragedy or loss, and we don't know where to turn. We're fearful, but we can't just sit back and pray that God will send someone else or that God will just hit us with some kind of miracle and fix everything, because that's not the way God works. God blesses us when we step out in faith and when we take action. If we're praying for God to give us a job, we can't just sit at home on the couch and wait for a job to drop into our laps. We have to go out. We have to interview. We have to research. We have to do our part. James 2:17 says, "So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." We have to have an active faith like Nehemiah had, trusting in God that he will bless what we're doing, that his army is behind us, pushing us forward and blessing us. And if we continue to pray and seek his will through the process, he will bless us and he will walk with us every step of the way. If we're praying for revival in our nation, if we're praying for someone to help the widows and the orphans and the people who don't have any money and the people who need food or clothing or whatever, but we sit back and we're not willing to do anything, we're not willing to be the hands and feet of Jesus, what good is that? James 1:27 says, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit the orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world." It's not that our actions save us. We are not saved by works. We are not saved by anything but the blood of Christ. But when we are saved, for me, it's my love for God and my appreciation for what he did for me, sending his son, that makes me want to do things. I want to serve him because I'm saved. I don't serve him to try to get saved. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Are you in the middle of a pile of rubble today? Has your wall been torn down? I think in America, we're at a place right now where the walls have been torn down, but we're also entering a rebuilding phase. We look at someone like Charlie Kirk, who was killed for his faith, and now his message and his impact is reaching the whole world. He's having a massive influence, and people are turning back to God. You constantly hear the phrase, "God bless America, God bless America." I think it's time for America to start blessing God, and America to turn back and seek God and seek his ways and turn things over to him. Get into the passenger seat and let God drive. It's a scary thing, surrendering and trusting God and saying, "Okay, whatever your will is, God, that's what I need. That's what's going to be best for me. That's what I want for my life." That's a scary thing. But this lesson from Nehemiah really just hit me between the eyes, because I thought, I've got to pray, yes, and I've got to surrender to God, but then I need to take action. I need to step out and overcome fear or anything else holding me back. Nehemiah's life was being threatened. Everything was being threatened. But he trusted in God and he prevailed. And that's what God expects from us. I just want to leave you guys with this verse today. 2 Chronicles 7:14. "If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and heal their land." It's time for revival. It's time to build back what was torn down by the enemy.